Hello and welcome to a short video from me, this tutor, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at the how useful question. We're looking at sources, which is question 2 in your conflict and tension paper, and we're going to be looking at the events around the Berlin Wall. Okay, so here is the question and the source. You can find it in your revision guide. Well, I imagine you've found it already because you probably pressed the QR code above it. So let's have a look at this question in more detail. So the question says, how useful are sources B and C to the historian studying how events in Berlin impacted relations between East and West? So we want to try and develop a response to this source. So in other source questions, I've given a more detailed criteria about how to do this successfully. But the main points are that we need to find a clear message from the source that relates to the question. We need to explain how that's useful or not useful with our knowledge, and we also need to consider the provenance and how that is useful or not useful in answering our question. And we do that for both sources, and then we get our full marks when we've given a clear judgment about how useful the sources are. So our first task, though, in the exam paper really is to have a read of the source and start to think about what is the main message from the source, how is the provenance useful and not useful, and start to deploy some knowledge to back up our ideas. So have a look through the source, and in your booklet fill in what is useful and not useful about the source, and start to apply some knowledge as well around the source as a plan. Okay, so pause me now and away you go. Okay, so here's my first set of ideas, thinking about the provenance a little bit. So the speech is given in Berlin, at the Berlin Wall, by Kennedy. So it's obviously quite a significant location, isn't it? You know, to stand at the Berlin Wall and say what he says. It shows a lot of defiance and strength of Kennedy. It's clearly going to be a defiant speech against communism based on the location. It's also the US president, and clearly he's anti-Soviet. He's just had the Cuban Missile Crisis based on a date, and he's a lot more confident than he was before. So clearly he wants to lead a sort of anti-communist speech. Okay, so in terms of the message of the source, it suggests that there's a big division now between East and West Berlin because obviously the wall's there, and he wants to keep West Berlin free and part of the free world. So he's sort of reinstating the Truman Doctrine to some extent. In terms of knowledge, obviously we know the Soviets built a wall around West Berlin and blockaded it. So now there are 3 million people there in West Berlin, to some extent trapped from East Berlin, who can only get out via simple roads and planes through East Germany. And they're going to have to work hard to ensure that those people remain free and part of the capitalist world. Okay, so how do we now turn this into an answer? So here is the writing frame we're going to follow. So we need to think about the level of value the source has got. So source B is either partly valuable or very valuable to the historian studying the events in Berlin impacting like the sort of international relations and the Cold War relations between East and West. Okay, so we need to give an opinion first of all about how valuable it is. Then we can talk about source B. We can either talk about the content first, the message, or the provenance. Doesn't really matter. And then we explain with a little bit of knowledge about that. And then we can do a furthermore or a however at the end. And again, talk about the other argument we've not talked about, either the content or provenance, depending on which we've spoken about earlier on. Okay, so let's give this a go. So make a decision now based on your plan. Is it partly or very useful to the historian studying the impacts, between East and West and Berlin's reaction to that? So give an idea. What do you think? Okay, possibly you might want to talk about the transformation of the Cold War, which is what this topic is about in this part of the booklet. Has it transformed the Cold War to be a bit more of a standoff between East and West? Have a think what you could argue. Okay, so pause and give it a go. Okay, so here's what I've gone for. So source B is very valuable to historians studying how events in Berlin impacted relations between East and West because it shows that the events in Berlin transformed the Cold War and it became more aggressive. As I said earlier, you could use the word standoff, and they're getting more towards a sort of colder tension. The thaw, as mentioned before, is coming to an end. Okay, so for example, source B says, so let's pick the content message first. How does the content back this up? So pick a part of the message of the source that might support that the Cold War has become more aggressive and there's more of a standoff between East and West. Okay, so I've gone for example, source B says there was a big division that's taking place in East and West, and the communism is trying to stop freedom from taking place. So how are we going to explain that this is useful and valuable? Okay, so now we need to back up some knowledge. So this means it is valuable about the impact on relations because, and see if you can pick out some knowledge to back this up. Okay, so pause and see if you can explain. Remember, we put a bit of knowledge in our plan and look back through the Berlin pages of the revision guide to maybe find some knowledge. Away you go. Okay, so what I've gone for is this means it's valuable about the impact on relations because Kennedy became more defiant as he saw the building of the wall, Berlin Wall, obviously as ending freedom. And Checkpoint Charlie became like a big standoff as the East was trying to take over West Berlin and denying people their freedom. Okay, so we could link towards Berlin Wall and Checkpoint Charlie as events that have happened before this about denying freedom to people. Okay, so then maybe we could talk about the provenance. So furthermore, the provenance tells us that, what could we say about provenance, do you think? Can you explain the provenance with a little bit of knowledge as well about how it all builds up to being valuable and useful? So pause now and give a provenance a go. See if you can say something about it and explain it with a little bit of knowledge. Okay, so here's what I've gone for. So furthermore, the provenance tells us that he did the speech at the West actually in the Berlin and next to the Berlin Wall. This is useful as he wants to use the symbolic location of the Berlin Wall to gain maximum attention so the free world will join him against communism. So overall, it's very valuable as events in Berlin and Cuba have transformed the Cold War to be more aggressive and the thaw is over. Okay, so he's really highlighting via his location that he wants to fight for freedom, and there's a symbolic location there. Okay, well, I hope that answer went well with source B. Here is one with source C. Okay, this is not in the revision booklet, but you could give this a bit of a go. See if you can answer this one. Use the writing frame for source B to help you and see if you can come up with a full answer on your own. Okay. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. I've put more source questions in the back of the revision guide for you to practice, making sure you're using your content, your provenance, and your knowledge to explain your answer. As you saw there, the provenance doesn't need to be massively complicated, it just needs to really show a good understanding of where something comes from, or the date, or the purpose of the source to give a good answer. Okay, and hopefully you've had a good revision of the Berlin Wall events as well. Okay, but keep working through the booklet, and I'll see you again another time. Bye-bye for now.